So in this module, we went through and we talked about why do we do pen tests? If you remember, we don't do it just to see if something can be broken into, but we can actually use it to help us come up with different policies or to gain or maintain a certification level with different industry regulations. We use it to adopt best practices, as well as see if we need to upgrade existing infrastructures or hardware and software, or even change up the network. We then went through and took a look at the different types of pen tests. We first talked about the differences between a pen test versus a security audit versus a vulnerability assessment. Then we talked about things like a blue team and a red team and what they were in charge of, as well as the different boxes. Remember, we had a gray box, we had a black box and a white box. And we got into black boxes. We talked about a blind versus a double blind test. We also talked about either announcing the test or doing the test unannounced and its advantages and disadvantages of doing either one of those. We then went through and talked about the different stages. Stage 1 being the pre-attack stage, which is where we go through and find information about the company. It's very passive. It's where we do all of our planning and preparation, where we set up our methodology, because we don't necessarily need to do a VoIP pen test if they don't use VoIP. We also came up with our documentation, like our rules of engagement, as well as understanding what the customer needed. And then we came up with things like defining the pen test scope, as well as the NDAs that we should have in place. We then talked about the attack stage. Dun, dun, dun. That's where we went after things like the perimeter, the firewall. We talked about how we then enumerate the devices, come up with their IP addresses, maybe their device ID so we can identify them to look for more vulnerabilities. We then talked about how to acquire the target, as well as then escalating the privileges of an account. And then, of course, we talked about executing implant and retracting, hiding ourselves once we made our way in, and then making sure that we could reestablish our connection. We then talked about the post-attack, where we go through and clean up our mess. I still hear my mother saying, clean up your room. It's the same concept here. Remember, we're going to clean up any registry entries that we may modify, any accounts that we elevated the privileges on, we're going to restore those. And that's why it's important to document everything. And then we also talked about the different standards that are out there. Each standard has their own different type of methodology, but you'll actually find that most of them are very similar to each other. Some of them are open sourced, others are more proprietary. And then we also went through and took a look at all the different things that we need to take into consideration with those standards. Do they have security cameras? Are they using mobile devices? Do they allow people to bring in personal devices? So now that you get a great understanding of what penetration testing is, in the next module, we're going to go through and take a look at the different steps that we need to go through during the reconnaissance and footprinting stage.